Welcome back, heroes, to another tutorial for the Hero Script system. For this one, we're going to go over the object spawner as well as the player inventory, which, to be specific, the player inventory is the beta version of it. I had more I really wanted to do, but it does have a lot of useful instances that you can have in its current state. The way the system is designed is meant to, rather than having like an individual item, specifying how many times you can spawn it. Instead, you specify all of the different types of items that you want, and you have a list of how many of them can exist in the world. With this, it's a lot more flexible, allowing you to create more and more items without like limiting how much a very specific item is going to be able to spawn. On top of that, I made it so these items can be a lot more flexible, allowing you to have a lot more things that the individual items can do with functionality rather than just being a simple prop. So on top of that, all of these items are meant to interact with the system as well, allowing you to have like a lot more dynamics, especially as like the Hero Script system evolves. So like when combat gets added, there could be combat interactions with items. When we get more survival stuff, food could potentially do things that actually regulate survival, and that pretty much just have a lot of different things each individual item can do. The Hero Script system for the object spawner also has it so each of the items has a more optimized way that they can interact within world. So what they are categorized under is 3 different types. You have interactables, placeables, and temporaries. Your interactables are your typical what you can pick up and move and interact with type of prop. You have your placeables, which are things that can spawn and be locked into the world. It is also possible to lock and unlock them, such as if I do this, and now I can pick it up and it's now a interactable. And then you could also then lock them in place and then turn them back into a placeable, which basically it's changes how a lot of how the data behind the scenes is managed to optimize how they work and how they interact in the world. And then you also have temporaries, where it spawns and it has no data associated with it. Really great for sound effects and particles to allow like something quick to happen that any individual item can utilize. To control how many interactables are within your system, you want to go under the HSS object spawner, interactables, and then inactive. However many are within this game object folder are essentially going to be how many items that can spawn within your project. If you want to add more, you essentially just copy paste them, and that expands how many more interactables you can have. For placeables, you don't actually need to regulate how many are going to be within, because the system will essentially create new placeables as is needed. Same goes for temporaries, as temporaries don't even need to use data. There will be as many as needed as the project goes for your temporaries. So now we're going to go into how to create the individual items. All items are put under this game object here, the put HSS item objects in here. This is how the system knows where everything is and organizes it. So whenever you're making an item, make sure you put it within here. I recommend when making items to make essentially game objects act as kind of like categories of items. What this will do is it will automatically apply a tag to the item that is used for search or categorization of the items within the system automatically. Also, it just makes it a lot nicer for organization. Now, to make an item, what you want to do is you essentially want to first create your object. So we're just going to go ahead and make like a basic cube thing that you could pick up or whatever. And then when you create it, you want to attach to it a component, which is your HSS item. This is the most basic item that has all of the same properties that every item has, which is all listed here. The next thing that you'd want to do is specify your collider pickup or VRC pickup if you want to specify different things within that, or its rigid body and whatnot. If any of those elements are not added because it's optional, what's going to happen is that instead it's going to use everything that is found within the default values item that is here. So this essentially will automatically set the values for the rigid body, the pickup, and a box collider. And if you wanted to, you can modify this to change what default values an item would have if it doesn't exist. Okay, so with that, we're just gonna go ahead and shrink this a bit to make it a little more of a prop size. And then you'll want to add an item ID to it. Now, there are 2 ways to essentially add item IDs en masse. Well, 3 ways. En masse, but you could also, set them individually if you want to have a very specific ID. If you are like first setting up all of your items within the object spawner, we have 2 buttons that help to quickly assign IDs. If you do generate new default item IDs, it's going to clear out all of the current IDs and then in sequential order in this list, give them an ID. So it's great if you're starting off and you just want to quickly give everything an item ID, but if you're starting to use persistence, probably not a good idea to utilize this, as it might have mismatched IDs in the future. So instead, if you are building off of your current list, the other one, which is generate more default item IDs, what that's going to do is go through and any item that currently has a 0 as their item ID, it's going to find whatever is the current highest value and then increment from there, giving them that value. If I were to do generate more item IDs, and then I go back to my new cube, it now has an item ID of 27, which is the current highest. Now, to mention, there are more types of items that inherit from HSS items. For example, you can add an item_u chips component, which will utilize the synchronized udon chips that the system ties into, or you can utilize the item_consumables. In the future, as like an item requires a lot more complexity, this is the type of like way that I'm going to expand upon what items can do, but it is possible to add functionality to your items using abilities. Like it can be seen here under the beer, which is the beer cup, is that with their abilities, I have it set up so when you use it, it uses the like similar functionality as the consumable to drink the cup. Like with the beer here, I have an ability on it to essentially spawn the ID 16, which I believe is the slurp, to give it a slurp effect every time you're drinking it. So while it is a consumable, it does all the normal functionalities of the consumable, but this is like an alternative way to making it so like it would have a sound effect or do something as you drink it. Another example being the teleport potion. Rather than the ability being on the potion itself, I have the ability responding to this ability down here, which is I made called consumables. This could also be found on the roleplays prefab that comes default with the system. To see more, check out the other tutorial videos. Now, it is very important to note that every item needs a unique item ID. This is how the system will distinguish the items from each other. If items have the same ID, you're going to get very weird things happening in the system, so just ensure that every item has its own unique item ID. Now to go over the specifics, I mentioned tags before, but you can add custom tags in here if you want to add more search stuff. So I can say this has a cube tag, and this will allow me to like find, you know, things related to cubes, but I can even add more and say this is also, even though it's under tools, it's going to automatically have the tools tag. If I say it is a food for no reason, then it will also show up under the foods part of the menu. To show what I mean, we're going to go back into the menu and then go into here, and if I go to the tag search, you'll see there is a cube tag now, and that will search for our cube. And you notice this is already a functional prop that you can move around, pick up, and all that. And now with that tag, if we go over to the items menu and we go and click on this, we'll see that there is cube in here now, and we can search for cube, and there it is. And as you could also see, the cube itself, you can pick it up and move it around like a basic prop because it's got all of the like default values. But also if we go to the tag, because we added it to food, you'll see that it is also in food, exact same item. Now to continue on, we have the main mesh, which you can use to set what is the main mesh if you have multiple meshes. We have the item color, which this is used in conjunction with force color names whenever you want to use like the set color on the cube itself. So if we do this and then we set it here, and then we're gonna pick, now this has to be the main color. So we're going to grab this, which you could also name others, such as if you wanted to set its emission or whatever. By setting the force color names and the item color, when it initially spawns, it's going to set it to this color. You could also utilize this in other ways to like change its color to have multiple different versions of that cube in different colors, which when we go in and we go to here and then we go ahead and find the cube and spawn it, you'll see now it's blue. I'm planning to expand more with that functionality of the color as well to make like different colored enemies or color effects and things like that. For the most part, it's infrastructure, but it's a great way to make it so like if you want to have something with multiple different colors, but you just specify in there instead of having to make multiple different shaders for it, it makes it a very quick way that you can set its color. Then we have is stackable, which is stackable when checked on. Allows you to have an item able to stack onto another item, and that item will then essentially follow that item. It's really great for doing things like plates or backpacks, which this item right here is also set to a stackable. So I can go ahead and place this on here, and now if I pick up that item, the other item will follow it. And yes, stackables can then stack onto other stackables, and it does a whole tree following of the item. And this will even remember like where it is in the tree if you like lock it and then unlock it, which I will show here. All close and then click. So now they're all locked, and then if I unlock it, boom, it still remembers like the way it's supposed to follow the items. Like I said, really great for like plates, backpacks, or anything that's an item that's supposed to carry another item. Is combinable will be the next one here. This allows an item to essentially, if it comes into contact with another of the same item, it will combine them together, which is a really great way if you have like something that's a resource or like a type of money or anything where it's like you're gathering multiple of that item and you want them to be able to combine onto each other because they are the same item. And the way this works is while in game, while looking at the item, if you grab this little item here, you can use that to split the stack. But you grab it, move it, and then use it, and then it will split the item. Now, another part of how the combinable works is you could also specify, depending upon like how much of the individual item there is, it can show and hide different parts of the item to be able to like have different levels of the item. So like I was having the one coin, the multiple coins, and then the coin pouch. That's done with combined states. So if I have, for example, I got coin 1, coin 5, and coin pouch, which are represented on the item here, coin 1, coin 5, and coin pouch. What it does is it compares it to this threshold, which by the way, the combined threshold number of these has to equate to this. When it equals to or exceeds that threshold, it will hide all the other associated game objects and show only the one that is meeting the threshold. So as you can see with this, if I grab this and have 1, this is currently 1, but if I have this with 4, it is also still currently 1, but because if they combine, they make 5, they will then hide the 1 and show the 5. A very quick way to have like multiple states within the combinable. On top of that, there's also a specification for a main animator. If you wanted to do this with animation instead, essentially you would want to set a variable, which is item quantity, as a float. And then as the quantity changes, it will affect the animator that it's associated with the item. And then you can use that as well as a way of like controlling different effects, how the item changes as the quantity of the combinable changes. You can also specify a maximum number that can be stacked with the combinable. Don't confuse the name stack with is stackable. Is stackable is specifically for items stacking on each other. But if you are combining a whole lot of items, you can specify essentially how much is too much. I think if you spawn it, you can get away with it. Nope. Okay, yeah. So with that, now the items themselves won't combine anymore because, well, this is the maximum that is allowed to be on the combinable stack. Can't go any higher, can't go any, well, you can still go lower. If you combine them together, this will just be, you know, at the 5,000, this will still be at the 48. Also, great way for like, you know, controlling how much of the individual item a person can carry. But of course, if you grab them and put them in your inventory, which, by the way I did that was with an ability. I have it set to the keyboard input of N. It will take the item in hand and stash it in inventory. I'll show you that real quick afterwards, but if I go to my inventory, you'll see I have 5,063 items now in there. So you can go higher in your inventory, but when you go to spawn it, of course, you won't be able to go beyond the stack. Equipping items is primarily a thing that you can do in VR, but if you want to be able to have an item to be able to like attach to your hip or your head or something, if you go to can equip, when this is checked on, it will show all of the acceptable equip bones down here. So when can equip is on, you can specify which bones this item will be able to attach to when it is dropped. It is possible to technically do this in desktop, but it's not something I would per se recommend, because as you can see now it's following me. It's really hard to necessarily grab it. I think the hip bone is fine because you can look down, you can grab it, and then you can pick it up. But as you can see, when I drop it near my hip bone, it will now follow my hip bone. I also have it following the spine, the right upper leg, whatever. But you can specify exactly which bones you're allowed to drop these items next to. And very, very helpful way if you want to be able to carry like multiple items, or if you want to be able to like have swords be able to equip to your back, or guns equipped to your hip, things like that. Attached behaviors is essentially a list of all of the custom scripts you might have on an individual item. What this will do is essentially when anything like initialize or set the item defaults, which are things called on by the items themselves, are called, it can call the same thing on your custom scripts, assuming that it meets all the conditions for send custom event. It's very more specifically for if you're doing coding, but it is useful if you're like wanting to do even more functionality beyond what the abilities can provide. Next, you could change how the physics operates with an item. So if you have let's go ahead and put a rigid body on this one. Rigid body obviously is going to have it so like it will use gravity and it'll fall. Right now it's currently a trigger, so no, it's not a trigger. Okay, so it'll interact with the world. So with this rigid body, it's now going to set the rigid body of the item such that it will fall. And not very, sometimes that could be very annoying if an item and you don't want to necessarily put it down. A lot of times people use kinetic for the rigid body so that way it doesn't fall. If you still want to be able to throw it, it still needs a rigid body. So what I have on here is the speed release for kinetic. If you put this to some speed, so if it's at 0, it essentially will always release it as a rigid body no matter what. But if you put some speed on there, what's going to happen is essentially when you release the item, it will track the speed of your hand. And if the speed exceeds this value here, it will instead release it as a normal rigid body instead of making it just float there. So we'll go ahead and go into like the more VR chat version of it, and that way I can actually show you. Now I can like throw it and it will actually throw it like a physical object, but if I just drop it, it'll just float there. And you can specify like if you really need to throw it hard or like if it takes nothing at all. But it's a great way to make it so you can have a lot more dynamic objects that you can like toss around. Should you wish. And by the way, this also, like when any object stops moving, it automatically updates it to essentially an idle object. So very much like how this is. So you don't have to worry about the thing having a rigid body, how, normally a rigid body might add a lot of calculations in the world. But in this way, it's a lot more optimized because it could be a rigid body, and then when it doesn't need to be a rigid body, it stops being a rigid body. Very optimized. And now we'll go over the beta inventory system to kind of show you like some of the features you can expect to use it for when it's here. One of the things is that if you're using the data archiver, it will save what is in your inventory. So this was something that I put in earlier today. So I can put like my hammer back in here. I can grab it. Essentially, if you touch any item to the menu, it's going to pull it in. So very useful as like a very basic inventory, be able to like have players be able to have items that they can spawn themselves if you don't want to necessarily allow them to spawn items themselves. sorry, if you don't want them to spawn it from a list, if they have items within world, they can like store it themselves and carry with them that way. They also have this wand here, which you can specify like what is allowed for it. This one by default will only delete items, so you can use that as a way to clean up after yourselves if you don't have necessarily a trash can. But I do have like these example items are trash cans, so if you put them by it and you click it, they will delete themselves. And you can also utilize these item spawners, which can have like curated lists. As you can see, this is the item spawner that a player has, but if I go to here, this is the item spawner that an admin has. So let's go ahead and look at the specifics on how to set that up. So if you want to see like an example of how the inventory is set up, if you spawn either the club or roleplay preset, it has pretty much all the things for those individual inventories needed. So right here, this is the admin item spawn. I say inventories, but this is also derived from it, which in here you can click this and it will show you like different ways you can customize how like things work. There's like the money stat if like you wanted to this is something in relation to like the udon chips and whatever. If you don't put it, then it'll just use the udon chips. I wouldn't recommend necessarily changing that. There's like things that I plan to use, like this originally came from like a vending machine, so I had like item use costs and whatnot, so to have like a way like if you ever spawn items from it, there could be a cost for it. There are more things that I plan to elaborate on as I more flesh out the inventory. I have like more that I want to do with it, but it'll be in the future. Here it has like a preset where the items will spawn, as well as like the search bar, which it utilizes. It always will need this, so essentially if you need something like this, I'd recommend pulling it in from like a preset, and it'll have everything that you need. But more specifically, what you want to customize here is either the target item or the tag for the parents. So for this one, it has like a list of items that you can specify where that are allowed from the actual spawning of the menu. In the player one, it has like more specifics on what you can specify, but it utilizes it a little bit differently. This is one of those things like there's a lot more that I need to do with it. There was more priorities more in like how the item spawn works, but if you go like to the player ones, it has like more customizable things that you can do with it. So this one, like instead of just doing target items, which has this, it also has like target item parents, which this is very useful if you're utilizing the organization of the items to use parents. So instead of needing to like add all the items all the time, what you can do is under here, you can essentially drag this onto here. And now anything that's ever under food or with the food tag should, well, actually, it's not necessarily all the things with the food tag. It'll be anything that is under this folder or game object will always be accessible. And then if I do this, I can add tools and whatnot. So you can add very specific items, or you can use this as a way of adding like a group of items. I found this to be very helpful as I was like continuing to add items and make it so like I'm not curating this list all the time. It depends upon how like your needs on organizing what the players can and cannot spawn. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know on different ways we can organize this. And then to go to the actual player inventory, which is the HSS player inventory. This is the one that actually governs all the very specifics related to your player inventory, which has like their inventory, the quantity of each individual items, whatnot. These are things that you don't really mess with, but you can use this to adjust how many items the player can have. So right now it's set to 16. So a player can't have more than 16 items. You can set it so whether or not a player can put in items. I'd recommend that to be on if you're using it as an inventory. And then I have like this item pickup sound, which is the sound that you hear every time you put an item into your inventory. And then this can't pick up sound is like if you're trying to spawn it from that inventory, it can play it if it's unable to spawn it. And then you got your inventory menu, which is the individual menu, which allows you to control like what's actually in your inventory. Let me switch this over. So this also has different things that you can do to specify different things. So most of what's in here is pretty much like it kind of needs to be the way it is. As I mentioned, the inventory is in a beta state, and I wanted to elaborate more onto it, but hopefully you guys find it useful. This is also like, as I was mentioning before, where you can like customize the wand. The wand itself has like ways to set it to copy, delete, lock, or unlock, and you can specify exactly like what this wand is allowed to be at the time it's used. What I currently have it set to is if you press U, if you're using the wand in VR, essentially if you click this bottom orb, it will switch between like the different modes, the delete, copy, whatever. And if you click this middle orb, it's going to switch between selecting one or selecting all that is close. If you want to change the way you interact with it in desktop, I currently have that as an ability that's under the toggle wand mode. This is set currently. If you were to press O, it will toggle the mode of the wand. It does specifically only for the admin wand because the player wand, I have it just set to only delete, so it didn't need a way to switch between modes. As you can see in here, it's got prerequisites and whatnot if you want to look through it, but if you wanted to customize specifically what key for toggling the mode, this is where you would set it. This is under, if you go into the abilities manager, abilities, and the HSS abilities, if you're using like the roleplay or the club setup, that's where you would find it. And then here you would have the changing for effect all, which is currently defaulted to P. So if you want to change those, the keys for the keyboard, or sorry, for the desktop, for desktop mode, this is where you would change it. So O to change the mode and P to change like between the what it affects. And I used a little bit of the wand in the beginning, but I would just want to show you the different like functionalities of it. So you have like the copy, so you can copy things, and you see how like it's not using both meshes. It's just because like the larger mesh is essentially its current mesh. Oh, that's one of the effects. So like for the phantom mesh essentially that you see, keep grabbing effects, it's using that as like what is the mesh that it copies from, and then I can use that and I can like grab and copy or whatever. And then if I hit, essentially if you ever drop it, it goes right back into the menu. So while holding it, if I press O, I can then set that to lock things. I can press O again and set it to unlock. If I press P, it affects all of them. So now if I grab all of these in the area, you see the phantom of all of those items. And then you click to paste them. And then you can like, if you twist the item while in your hand, it should like twist. But also if you like hold it and then move, it'll like shift. And then, you know, you could also, like, if you're spawning way too many items, you can then do a mass delete. Very, very nice for doing a quick cleanup. Now, as well, if you're having, like, a problem with many, many items in the world as well, let's go ahead and just spawn a bunch of them again. You have a couple of ways you could also clean them up from the item spawn in the admin section. If you do clear all interactables, you will clear all the interactables in the scene. If you do clear all placeables, which currently those two are the placeables, it will delete all of the placeables in the scene. Very quick way in case anything is getting out of control. Now, if you have the data archiver, just note there is essentially a way you can save all of the data. It can separate between the placeables and also the interactables. The placeable manager essentially governs all of the placeables, and the object spawner governs all of the interactables, which I'll specify more on how you can like do the data management like that in a future video. As I mentioned in the beginning, you can attach abilities to your different items, as I shown with the ability for this whenever it's used to be slurped. One thing to note is if you're going to be utilizing ways that the items can work by using them, be sure to have like the script attached to the item's like parent, because that's where a lot of the pickup stuff is going to be. If you're using things like on pickup use down, player trigger, etc, etc, etc. And then if you have other things like wanting to utilize on trigger enter, like for the barrel that you saw when I was pressing the cup into it and it filled it up, you would want to put the ability on whatever the collider that it's going to collide with. So this is the parent, but instead I have the ability here with the collider so that it's separate. And that way I could also specify the exact layer it's going to be on and all that, and make it have various interactions. So let's go ahead and add an abilities component to our cube here. So that way I can show you the specific abilities that you might be able to expect related to items in inventory. Now, to start off with the inputs, we have input consumable used. This one will trigger at any point that an item is used by the player related to consumable items. You would target the item that is being consumed here, or don't if you want it to trigger off any item that is being consumed. And you could also specify the percentage of quantity that is left. So if you do 100, this will trigger every single time it's used. And if you do like 1, this will only be triggered when it's like almost at the very end, depending upon the percentage. And then 0 will be triggered on death of the item, essentially if it's like fully used. This is something that I utilize within the abilities component that I have for like the potions being able to allow you to teleport, or the no clip potion being allow you to like fly around, if you want to see like examples of how it's used. Next we have input item spawn. This will essentially trigger it at any time an item is spawned, and instead of like specifying the game object item, I used item IDs, so you can specify an exact item ID that is spawned, or if you specify none, it will trigger anytime any item is spawned, and you can specify what type of item. Item values change allows you to trigger the ability anytime an ability item value is changed. Very useful if you have like something that you want to trigger when if you have like on use, you wanted to change an item value, like a custom item value. You use this as a way to like check when that item changes, then you can check the value it is currently at, so that way you could have different trigger effects. Like if you're having an item that is like, and you don't want to necessarily use that item consumable, you can have a trigger when it's like halfway eaten. Or if you want to have, I think I had like a Russian roulette gun, which you can see within the club setup, that actually has like bullets that it tracks specifically, and you can have like anytime that item changes to have like either a sound play or different effects. But essentially anytime a item value related to a specific item, so like this is target item ID 1, this is anytime that item's specific value changes. And then to move on, we go to the prerequisites, and here you can specify what item is being held, the current collision. If you have something triggering off of a collision, you can specify very specific things related to the names that were collided. Very useful if you're trying to, like, as I believe I was using for the refill of like the wine barrel and whatnot. Yeah, I have item collision here. You can specify like only do collisions for the owners and only look for an empty mug, etc., etc. Very useful if you're trying to like specify very specific things when an item collision happens, if that is one of your triggers, to like specify what should be considered to be happening for that ability. Also includes things like the velocity threshold, like how fast they need to be like colliding with each other for it to actually trigger. Then there's also, along with like item collisions, so you have like player collisions. You can also compare specifically the item to a value. So for this one, this is specifying an item, the value name that is on the item, so the item values, and then you can specify what that item value is. But you could also compare it between two different item and their item values rather than seeing the item value that is on there. So if you are trying to compare this item's value to the one that is colliding with, you could utilize this to compare the values on the items. And then the last one is just making sure that you are the owner of the item, or specifically whichever player that you want to target. So if you do local player, you can verify that the local player is the owner of this item. And then we go to events. We got event inventory. This is what I utilize to do the actual like adding an item that is in the player's hand to your inventory. It doesn't really have much else beyond that. I plan to add a lot more specifics that this could be used for, but you can specify like an item in hand, near point, the last item that was spawned, etc. Having way that an ability could add a particular item that exists into the player's inventory. Then we have object spawn, which is primarily for the spawning of items or things related to items. You can spawn the various types, so you can spawn an item as a placeable, so having an ability that's like something that is when the player spawns, it does it will spawn like an item. Or if you have like when you enter into an area and on trigger, you can have like items that spawn. You can spawn them as placeables, which will essentially just exist there and not be able to be picked up. You can spawn them as interactable, so the players can pick them up and do things with it. You can spawn them as a temporary temporary, so that way they like do like an effect or whatever. Just know essentially temporaries always delete themselves, so you don't have to worry about the data related to it. And then the placeables are just going to be there until like some other effect will either remove it, convert it to an interactable, or some other thing. And then you have like convert item. This one is the one where you can like actually convert it from one item to another, and you convert it via their item ID. So if you wanted to like have, for example, the way that I utilize the actual filling of the cups on the refill, what I do is I actually convert the item to last collided to the actual like wine or beer. So this one is the item ID for the wine, and then for the beer it's the item ID for the beer. So very useful if you're wanting to like switch items up into like either, I don't know, an item that converts into a sword, or something that turns into a broken item or a broken version of the item that has completely different functionality. Very useful as a way to like convert items. And then of course we have ways that you can delete items, and then we could also convert items, which is instead of just one, it's going to be multiple items. And then also delete multiple items. And since we mentioned it, there's also one for the synced udon chips. It has a way for you to actually set a player's udon chips value, either set or adjusted, and you target which player. So you can also have like if somebody enters into an area, it'll grant them chips. If you interact with an item, it grants you chips. You could have like if you eat an item, it will grant you chips. Very useful, especially if you're doing anything that utilizes udon chips. Now, if you want to do other things that can affect an item, you could do affect item. And this allows you to do different things like set and adjust, multiply their item values. So if you wanted to have items that have different things, like as I mentioned with the revolver, I have values that like utilize how much bullets are in it, or like what the bullet is in the chamber, since it's using like a Russian roulette type setup. You can use this as a way of setting or adjusting the actual values that are on the item. Just do note, anytime that you are utilizing variables, you want to ensure that you go over to required scripts, HSS stats, and you want to apply a variable definition for that variable. So if I'm wanting to add something that's like a number for, I don't know, blah, you just got to make sure that you define it here first, and then you can adjust it easily. This is just a way that I had to more of confine variables and have like a lot of ways to describe them within the system. So always make sure if you're going to add a custom variable, it gets a custom ID, really doesn't matter, and a custom name, and those two pairs can't be the same as any other item or other variable definition. So with that, you can set, adjust, multiply any of the variables that are on there. Make sure it's like the correct name, encasing, and all that, and the actual specific type. So if it's a float, it should be a float. If it's a byte, it should be a byte. And then you can set it to whatever, or adjust it to whatever. And then lastly, you can specify to drop an item if anything requires, like if you were to wanting to convert it or delete it. Well, actually, delete really doesn't matter because it automatically drops it. But if you wanted to like force them to drop it for whatever reason, use this to drop the specified item. And all of them usually has like ways that you specify which item that you want, like so near point or in hand, in a player's hand or whatever. And then lastly, we will go over the overrides. So as mentioned before, we have item values, and you can utilize a specific item value for like override. So if you wanted to display it on a UI, if you wanted to set something based on the value that is on the item, or utilize that item as part of a comparison, the override item values allows you to use those item values for whatever you want to do with them. So you can specify the like target methods. We have the item name, so that's just going to be the actual item name, not the item value. Sorry, there's more that it actually specifies. You specify like the item, specifically their name, their position, the rotation, the item ID on them, the spawn number, which is associated with the number that when you spawn them as placeables, interactables, whatever, they have an associated spawn number. The movement type, So this is related to like if they're idle or if they're moving or if they're in somebody's hand or following a bone. That's what's related to that. And then you also have the movement name. So instead of like the ID, which you may not be able to use, you use the movement name to actually use as part of like a display or whatever. And then this is what I was talking about initially, the actual item value. So this would be, you use the name and it will return it as a value, which you can use as part of your interactions with items or set them to like a text, or like if you attach a text value to the item. I have another one, which I'll cover more when I cover player menu, but I do have one that's like event UI, which allows you to set different UI items. You use that as like if you have like a gun and you're using it, you can set it to the actual bullet value every time that it's used. Very useful for that. But yeah, essentially anytime that the system has a value that you can override that value with the value that is specified in an item using this. And then sync chips also has one, which we have the player chips or the my chips, if you ever wanted to override a value with the Udon sync chips. And that covers all the specifics with the items in inventory. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, please list them below and I will address them accordingly. As well as if you are using it yourself and you find that there is other features or other bugs that you've come across, I have a canny that's also listed in the description. Please post there and I'll get it fixed as soon as possible. But yeah, I plan to do a lot more to evolve a lot of the items. This was one of the things that like took one of the most time, because I really wanted dynamic items that were optimized, that could do a whole lot of stuff. And I feel like I've accomplished that with this the hero script system. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Take care and goodbye.